like a internal hesitance to like feel guilty about leaving or something like that, you know. So
Oh man, you want to hear something that's a bummer, and we'll keep talking about the actual conversation. I'm pretty sure YouTube glitched out and only actually just started streaming to YouTube, even though it should have
hey,
when I said it
YouTubers.
before. That's really depressing. Oh, that's okay. This will be fully on YouTube afterward. It'll just be more of a process than that. But if you're joining us on YouTube right now, what a weird moment to jump into the show. But anyway, yeah, I think your instincts on all this stuff is right and really interesting. I did have a follow up that now I've confused myself and lost it about it. But those are all great games, by the way. If you and I'm really excited about Usabis Bed and Breakfast, which I was an enthusiastic backer for. We were lucky to have Jay come on the show right after Usabis campaign finished, and we could talk all about that. But that's Usabis is a good example of a game that I am really excited to bring to my game club, because like the chapter
Yep.
system, right, is like perfect for those kinds of things. You don't have to really know any rules. You can just kind of go into it, pick up a character, start playing really quickly. May or may
Yep.
not ever play in it again. It kind of has that.
It's exactly my jam. Now I haven't
Yeah.
actually played Usabas yet, so
Yeah.
I don't actually know if I like the experience.
Yeah.
But conceptually,
Yeah.
it's my jam, and so much so that like here I am having never played the game before, and I have like a hack in mind that I'm
There you
actually
go.
pretty serious about.
Okay.
That I want. So
Very cool.
it's an ambitious idea. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but
It's
yeah,
super
I
fun.
would love
I
to.
I was very lucky to play 2 games with Jay on stream for with plus 1 EXP, and it was just a blast. One of the ones we did, both of them are extremely memorable. Like I play a lot of RPGs, and they really were memorable experiences, like stand out memorable experiences. And I can tell you exactly what they were. One chapter was doing laundry, and then the other chapter was going fishing, and they were exceptionally memorable. And like there's some
Yeah,
beauty in the like simplicity of what they do, and the
I
narrative structure of what they do. Yeah.
I'm so enamored by designers like Jay that are able to make slice of life interesting. Like I haven't quite gotten there
Mm.
yet with like, you know, for me, I need like what's the high concept or something in my design,
Yeah.
because it's just like it makes sense to me narratively. The slice of life stuff, like I listen to a lot of you know, RPG podcasts and
Sure.
actual plays and that sort of thing, and those are my favorite episodes almost always, right? But I can't for the life of me figure out how I would design a slice of life game.
Okay,
So,
interesting. You'll get. I mean, we'll see. Maybe you'll find what yours is. That's kind of how it was for me with Broken, which is basically, I guess you could call it a slice of life game, breakup
mhm.
game. But like, it was just figuring out what mine was. You know, I think that's kind of what it was. Well, that I'm like dying to like ask you your TTRPG backstory, because we're kind of like talking around it. So,
Sure.
how did you? You said it's new to you. So like, what's your backstory? What's your yeah.
Well, it starts at the
Uh huh.
young age of
Uh huh.
5, I guess. I had the red box D&D. I don't even know what it was. I don't even know if it was the red box, but it was a red box and it was D&D. And I was digging through the box and you know, found it very interesting, and you know, it had a dragon on it. Well, I mean, that's sick, right? And then my church told my mom that D&D is of the devil,
This isn't even
and
planned. This is just perfect. But go on. Yeah.
yeah, and so it very swiftly left my house. I
Oh.
did play Dungeons and Dragons one time, um, you know, when probably in middle school or something like that. I don't remember the game at all. I remember. Do you remember those like stretchy elastic book covers that you would? They're like spandex book covers
Oh
for
no,
school.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, I remember getting distracted from the game and wearing it like a superhero mask. That's what I remember.
All right.
Um, anyway,
That's very funny.
and then I didn't play any role playing games again until adulthood.
Yeah, thanks
Um,
God. No, just kidding. Sorry, I was right. Yeah. By the way, you can now tell that church. Go back. You should go back and tell that church. By the way, and now I'm talking about TTRPGs and making them and talking about it with a priest. So there, take that.
exactly. Take that.
Take that.
So the story I always tell is, so the pandemic changed a lot of things. And for me, one of those things that it changed was social connection. Like I'm already kind of like naturally a recluse, if you will. Like,
okay.
And so then with the pandemic sort of like forcing that, I'm not a highly online person in general either, right? So I don't have a lot of like digital connections or friendships in general. So like I just sort of suddenly found myself without any outlet other than just being with my family, who I adore. But you need other things, right?
Yeah.
And I discovered, looking for a hobby, I guess, right? Because how I used to get connection a lot was playing basketball with a group of guys that I used to work with, and that stopped pretty abruptly with the pandemic as well. So I needed a hobby. I needed a way to fill some time that was just for me, and I got into game books. You remember, like, sort of choose your own adventure type things? Yeah. I'm looking at a stack of Fabled Lands books right now. And so got into that enough to start a podcast about that, which actually I think was more about the connections with those authors than it was about game books for me. Yeah. Right. And I made some cool friendships that way, and also kind of got really interested in creating, because I was like, man, I want to make a game book, right? By the way, if you're not familiar with the game book space, like the modern game book space, there's a ton of really talented writers that are creating books today.
That's awesome.
That absolutely deserve your time. You can think of it as sort of an echo of like, these are the children of the 80s and 90s who enjoyed these as kids, and now they're making their own for themselves. So they're adult interest level.
Sounds really awesome.
Yeah. So go check them out. Not to exclude anybody, but just to name a couple of favorites, kind of off the top of my head. Victoria Hancock's is really amazing, makes sort of like psychological thriller and horror books. And Samuel Isaacson, probably most popular for his science fiction series. There's a number of them, but if you find them, you'll find the others. Anyway, back on track. Where was I? I'm telling you how I got into games.
You got to game books, and you were thinking about making game books.
And so, but the thing I found with game books, and this isn't what led me to RPGs. It's just like they're just hard to make. There's so much planning and writing involved with game books.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and also people have very high expectations for there being lots of art.
I was wondering about that. Yeah, expectations. Yeah.
Yep. So anyway, it wasn't really a good outlet for me as a creator, but as a reader, it's a great hobby.
Cool.
But then I don't even know how I came across Itch, but I think what happened was I got interested in Ironsworn because first I got interested in D&D, but it was just too dang complex, and I couldn't find a group to play with, right? So I was just like, well, to heck with this. And I started playing solo with Ironsworn. Have you played Ironsworn before?
I have a little bit, yeah, just to like mostly experience how it works, the system.
Yeah. So it's a really cool system, and Sean Tompkin did an amazing thing by creating that first book and offering it for free. I probably wouldn't have tried it, frankly, if it wasn't free, because I wasn't sure about RPGs.
Yeah.
So, I didn't have any reason to believe I would like it, except like, I'll try it, And I was amazed at the way that Ironsworn doesn't tell you a story, it pulls a story from you, right? And I think that was the moment that really hooked me on RPGs was, oh, wow, like it's not about making worlds for people, right? It's about making world building engines and letting people experience those, right?
Tools, right? It's giving people tools. Yeah.
exactly. Yep. And so then, the rest is history. I just, over time, I honed in on my particular taste, and I tend to like quirky little games by indie designers. And so I spend most of my time on itch. I have nothing against drive-through RPG, but just like for whatever reason, from a design perspective, like I can't find my way around on there. So I spend most of my time on itch and picking up games, participating in game jams, that sort of thing. So
Very cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's so fascinating to me to hear, like, because what some of the discourses a lot of times in TTRPGs and indie TTRPGs is like, the discourse around like D&D, is it complex? People a lot of times say like, oh, D&D, it's like, well, there's just like all that discourse that you see, and I don't know how much of it is real people saying real things or not, but you are a real person who was like, I'm going to start playing TTRPGs. Ooh, D&D seems complex that I have no one to play with, so I'm going to do this indie thing. Well, that's way easier. And just got into narrative games. And, like, it's funny because that is sort of you are instantly the poster child of all the indie creators who are constantly trying to say that thing, and it's like you're the real story of that.
Well, here's why I think it's true.
Yeah.
From my own personal experience. I think there's and actually some postulating outside of my personal experience too.
Sure.
I think there's like two cultures of play for D&D that allow people to kind of get into it. And one is the don't worry about it, just come play with the group, and we'll help you know everything you need to know. So it's very like DM driven.
Yeah.
And I think that works really well. It wasn't available to me, so it couldn't work. Right.
Right.
And then the other is, there's somebody who's enthusiastic enough to, crack open the book and learn the rules. And I think that there's the sort of the pot of gold at the end of like, and then I'll get to play in worlds for years and years with my friends. Right. But for me, it's like, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to get people to play this game, that sort of thing. So that pot of gold wasn't there. And I'm like super high ADHD. So like trying to, without any real promise of it necessarily working out or paying off, trying to dig through a rules book, which frankly doesn't feel that well organized for the way my brain works, it just wasn't working.
Yeah.
So
that's it. You made a really interesting point, and sometimes we do get into issues of accessibility, issues of like things like that on the show. It's like something I do like to talk about. And my spouse is somebody with ADHD, and I have a child, at least one. I have one diagnosed ADHD child, probably 3 children with ADHD, but that's just me knowing them and guessing. And so like we kind of talk about that a lot, especially in my household. And like I'll just be blunt. I hope my wife doesn't mind me saying this. Like when I first started playing games with her, especially like D&D, it was like I was not the most accessible, friendly person to her neurodivergence around the table, because it was just like not what I was used to. And it took a little bit, and she actually wasn't diagnosed yet and had never been in her life until adulthood. So it was kind of like a new discovery in adulthood for her and for us. And so like, I've learned a lot about that, and like D&D. So my experience of it with her and with like figuring that out and stuff was that like D&D is not, at least for her, and maybe it was our table style, I don't know, but not the most ADHD friendly game she could play.
Right.
It was really easy for her to just struggle at the table, and so I don't know. It's interesting. I guess you probably haven't played. And go ahead. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, what were there any specific moments that were the most difficult for her?
It's a good question.
I'm asking because I have my own guesses, but
okay.
Anyway.
So that's a good question. It's hard for me to speak for her. I'll have to ask her after the stream, and she's actually not in the chat this week, so she can't even answer. But I will say, just noticing or running for her, there was a lot of like, she was gone from the table a lot, like prolonged sessions, especially of people dealing with other players, other characters. It was just really easy for her. It was like easy for her to like get up and do something else, go into the kitchen, offer people to do like, and helpful things like, hey, you know, I'll get drinks for everybody from the kitchen. Anybody want any snacks? Things along those lines. That was my main memory of it. And as someone that didn't understand the like kind of a phenomenon that was happening, I remember as a GM even thinking like, oh, am I just boring for her? Like, is that what's happening? Because I didn't understand what was happening. You know what I mean? And now that I have a different appreciation of it, a different experience, what kinds of things do you think are kind of a struggle for having ADHD?
So I can extrapolate from game books because there's, you know, a variety of rule systems that are used in game books for combat. And with RPGs, like I generally am not even going to give a game a chance if I don't like the system on abstractly on a read through, you know, that sort of thing. Whereas with game books, there's the story, and I'm reading it for the story probably in the first place, and it's already written. Like it doesn't have to have a system that helps me generate a story, that sort of thing. Anyway, that was kind of a side track.
No, it's good.
But there are systems that are there's a lot of dice rolling back and forth of like, and then I hit them, and then they hit me, and then I hit them, and then they hit me, and I'm like literally just like thinking about, oh man, did I forget to, you know, that sort of thing. So I tend to change the rules systems on game books because I have certain preferences there. I think that's the biggest thing for me. I'm like hyper focus, and so as long as there's something to captivate my interests, I can focus in on it. But then I'm very quick to lose that focus if something doesn't retain my interest, like a tedious back and forth rolling system or something like that.
I hear you. I mean, it's interesting that you say it that way, because for me, that's with listening to actual plays. So, like, I can't listen to actual plays that use systems where that's what the combat is like. And as far back as, like, listening to the Adventure Zone, and I did listen to all of the balance arc of the Adventure Zone when it came out, but I couldn't pay attention during combat, which luckily wasn't a ton of that show. But, like, I'm just not going to pay attention. It's just my brain is not going to pay attention to that. It's just not. It's going to pay attention to, God, anything else. Like, anything else it's going to grab onto. But it is that, when you described it as the back and forth kind of system, back and forth rolling, attacking system, is just like... And then maybe that is why I gravitate towards narrative games.
Yep. It's funny,
really
I've recorded a number of game book playthroughs that have systems like that, and you know, one of the things I do is I use a editing software that lets me sort of like automatically remove dead air, right? And so I do that, but combat just sounds so stupid when you remove the dead air, because it's like 3, 1, 2, 5. You know, like, anyway.
That's really funny. Yeah, that's really funny. So, when you started playing like more narrative games, are there, other than the ones you mentioned that you're interested in playing, that you have the stack of, are there any like that stand out for you as stuff that you really wanted to model your design after, that you were just really like excited about, enamored by?
Sorry, I was still thinking about my last statement. So, it was so when thinking about narrative games. Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Yeah, no, you're all good. You're good. I was just like, when you started getting into more narrative games, I know you already mentioned like games that you're interested in, that you have a stack of over there, but like, are there other ones that like really enamor you, or that you're really excited by, or maybe even that you kind of saw as like models for designing that you were like really intrigued by?
Yeah, so the belonging outside belonging system is a big one for me. And I haven't actually made a belonging outside belonging game. I have made a No Dice No Masters game actually, so I guess I kind of have, but it's not, I wouldn't consider it the same thing. So there was a game by James Hanna, Bullfrog Jam, I think is, anyway, the game is called Sabotage.
Okay.
And it is a particular implementation. I think it's such a specific indicator of what my interests are. So Sabotage is a sort of a game about like labor unions, well, not really labor unions, but like laborers sort of fighting back against the factory that's not really treating them well by sabotaging the machines and that sort of thing. So that's sort of on the narrative side, like that's super cool, right?
Yeah.
And then on the design side, like even before we get to the mechanics, on the layout side, it's one page, just one page, right? And on that page, they've crammed in the rules, they've crammed in character creation, they've crammed in map right or drawing, right? They've crammed in sort of what's the word? Sort of wretched and alone style, like card-driven prompts.
Okay.
Wow,
and that's so this is on a page.
On a single page, and it doesn't feel overwhelming either. Like it's just such a masterwork of minimalist layout and fitting a lot into a page without it feeling overwhelming. It's also mechanically something I said there just shows sort of my interests too, right? It's kind of a kit bash, right? Because it's like, well, it's no dice, no masters, but also it's kind of like Alone Amongst the Stars or the Wretched and Alone style stuff, like, you know, and let's bring these things together. And well, now it's only one page, so we kind of have to do away with some things. So we're going to get rid of, you know, playbooks and setting elements, you know, that sort of thing. Right. So I like that kind of thing a lot. Some of my favorite systems, just to list some, right? Sure. I love Belonging Outside Belonging. I love the Alone Amongst the Stars system. I like Wretched and Alone. Will Lentz, Gamenomicon, has a really cool system called, oh my gosh, I made a game in the system and I can't remember what it's called.
It has to be all the time.
The Second Guess system.
Okay.
And it's really cool. I'm going to take a diatribe into this for a second because what it attempted to do was, again, a kind of a kit bashy thing. It wanted to make a Wretched and Alone game on a single page. And, but like, well, if you need to make, you know, 56, however many prompts, you're not going to be able to do that on a single page and it, you know, look good or, you know, tell a story well. And so he did away with the cards and he just used a D20 and, you know, so there's 20 prompts. But then wait a second, what happens if you roll the same number again? And there's like, oh, well, you just revisit that prompt and say like, oh, there was something I didn't know about it, or, you know, discover a new clue or whatever it is, right? That's thematically appropriate. So anyway, really cool small system. So I like these small systems, and then I like sort of bastardizations of the systems where it's like the kit bash where you're like, I'm going to take some of that.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that.
Sort of thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it's amazing to me. Like, we're just like, the theme of Holy Happy Hour Batman since it started has been the incredible boom that we're in of indie TTRPGs, which you touched on. We're talking about itch and like you're finding itch and exploring itch, and like it's just intriguing for me to hear you talk about this stuff because like all of that stuff, so many of those innovations in TTRPG design, so much of the amazingly creative stuff happening on one-page games and the stuff that you're talking about with narrative games and like so recent. It's all so recent. It's just happening right now and we're in the middle of it. And like, so it's just so cool. And it's cool. I don't know. I've been playing TTRPGs. I'm the other person that we talked about. I'm the one who's been playing since I was little consistently. And, it's amazing to me. I love being able to just talk to creators like you who are like doing really interesting, innovative things, trying to say like, well, what if we did it all in one sheet? What if we like made it really newcomer friendly? What if it, and I just did, it's just amazing. It's not, again, not a question. Just like, it's so cool to be in the middle of that particular boom of just really innovative, really creative stuff that's happening. It was also, this is kind of a question, I guess. It's also like a bold thing to like want to say, okay, I want to start tackling those design things too. Was it a little bit intimidating for you to say, I'm going to try to design like this as a newer person to it, the scene?
Yeah, well, yes and no. I
Yeah.
think that there are some systems that really invite you in,
Yeah.
and make it feel almost like you can't not. You know what I
I
mean?
do
Like,
know what you mean. I do.
yeah.
I do.
And the first one that almost did that for me was the Wretched and Alone system, because it's so obvious, like how to, like, once you've seen a game, it's like, oh yeah, I know how to make a game like this, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Now in practice, I found that actually making a Wretched and Alone game was difficult for my brain, and it wasn't for the reasons you'd think. I think that there's a specific writing talent that I really admire and respect that I've been developing, which is, basically prompt writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're not dictating your it's that pulling forth that I was talking about, that sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
And Chris Bissett, as an example, does that in a magical sort of way, right? But actually, for me, the challenge I had was that the system is so simple and obvious once you get it, right? Like, once you've played one of those games, that like my brain couldn't let it be, and had to like invent variations on it, right? And so much so that I have like a pile of probably about 30, not exaggerating. I was about to say 100. 100 would have been exaggerating. Probably about 30 like half starts to Wretched and Alone games that I just like, and then I was like, oh, and then I could do this and that, and then it just all kind of crumpled in on itself. Like, oh, that doesn't work actually, you know. The one thing that I did in Wretched and Alone that I think actually worked pretty well was I have a game that's still in development but is available, called Here and Far. And Here and Far this is another example of, I like collections, I guess. The concept of Here and Far is, it's a collection of games where the theme is you're with someone but can't communicate with them, right? And so then it's different variations on that. So then what I did was I said, well, I don't want to have to write 56 prompts for every game that I want to make. So I really liked the way that Alone Amongst the Stars does the suits and the card values, but I didn't like the way that it's deterministic, and like it's always like, really, even though there's 4 suits and 13, is that right, card values, at the end of the day, like the combinations are like set, like those are going to be the combinations, right? And so I tried to change that. And so what I did is I did I can't even remember what I did with it yet. Oh yeah, I did the 13, not the 13, everything but the kings and aces number values as a set of prompts that were that would make sense in that generic theme of like, you're with somebody but can't communicate with them, right? And then each game, all it brings is the 4 suits that bring the theme of the specific game into that, and the aces and kings, which give you the sort of the win-loss conditions and stuff like that. And so it was a really interesting playtesting challenge to like, do these prompts actually work?
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so I want to kind of circle back to, you mentioned something earlier, which was that your D&D red box got swept under the rug of the Satanic Panic, and we are now in a Satanic Panic memory renaissance of sorts, with Stranger Things deciding to do a Satanic Panic season, and there's the Satanic Panic documentary came out recently, and so that was talked about a lot in a Gen Con and things. But I'm curious about your, that religious background that told you that this thing was of the devil and you shouldn't play it. Yeah, tell us about that, like growing up in that kind of religious background, what it was like, what kind of what kind of religion it was and whatever.
Yeah. So I grew up in Virginia in a Baptist first and then Presbyterian after. And the reason that
So, sorry, where in Virginia?
It was in Northern Virginia.
Northern Virginia.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
I won't go too specific because
yeah.
I will say some things that are kind of maybe rude to the,
understood.
to the church. So
Understood.
Yeah, and we did ultimately the reason that we left the Baptist church was there was some racial stuff. There wasn't any like currently active racial stuff, but like we found out about the church's history and we were like, oh gosh, and so we left that church, and then jumped around a few churches for a while, and then ended up at a Presbyterian church, and that was kind of our church family for many years, and ultimately ended up leaving that church a little bit more gradually, but it was sort of in some ways political and in some ways I don't know, like non-inclusiveness, right? So there was a pretty historic, I don't remember all the details of it, but there was because I was just a kind of twerpy teenager at the time, but there's a relatively historic like vote thing happening on like whether or not to allow gay pastors or something like that going on. And our church was like one of the standouts that was like, no, we can't let this happen. And I was like, okay.
Bummer.
So yeah, that's one of the reasons we stopped going there. And then what else was going on? Oh, it was even more basic than that, right? There was even questions of whether to allow women pastors, I believe.
Nice.
Happening. So yeah, all kinds of stuff going on. And I forgot where I was going with this. And also church sermons changed from being about faith and started to be about upcoming elections.
I see.
And it was like, it just wasn't, there was nothing there for me, that
the growing Christian nationalism of evangelicalism in the United States. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And this church I wouldn't really necessarily describe it as an evangelical church. It was relatively traditional, sort of setting. I actually thought the evangelical churches were so cool back then, right? Because I was a musician, and the music in those churches, for me at the time, I was just like, wow, they play drums, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But so I after we left that church, I was sort of old enough to kind of put my foot down and be like, I'm just not interested, Mom, that sort of thing. And so I never went back to a Christian church other than, just here and there with friends or family. I'd be like, sure, I'll come to church with you. And then, I'll pause there. I don't want to just ramble forever.
Oh, you were fine. You're fine. I was listening to your story, and I find it to be really interesting. Well, do your parents still go to church? If you feel like outing them, I guess, on the air here.
They did for a while,
yeah.
And I think it took longer, but they kind of came to a similar place. So they're still believers, but I should say my mom in particular. My dad never really was much of a churchgoer in the first place because he was his church is on a lake fishing. So that's what he does.
That's a cool church. That's a great church.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is.
There's some precedence for it in the
Absolutely,
Bible, as it turns out.
As it turns out, yeah. That's funny.
Anyway, so my mom, it took her a little bit longer, I think, to recognize that church had become more of a political affiliation than a faith thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that she sometimes misses, but also like it's still today there's absolutely a challenge where I don't think she would step step foot where she lives now. I don't think she would step foot into a church because she'd be afraid of the kinds of people she'd encounter there.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Frankly. So
I've just been thinking about that kind of thing a lot, especially actually in a coincidence sort of way. This morning, a large platform in Christianity that is not. So I'm an Episcopal priest. I'm in the Anglican world, but I do follow a couple people just because they're interesting. Because sometimes they're really deeply insightful. They have a lot of wisdom. But I follow some people who write about church issues but they're like in the more mega church world, in the more evangelical world, but not sort of in the like very right-wing version of that, but are still very much in that world. And I read a very extensive article today from somebody in that world about like it was basically about, the long and short of the article was that it was trying to prevent a coming civil war in the United States of America. And that sounds inflammatory, but it was very much like made an argument as to like, if you think that's too inflammatory, here's why maybe it's not, and here's what churches and pastors could do to try to avoid that. But it made some really interesting points, and one of the things it talked about extensively from a demographics perspective was the idea of like super factioning, and how like the United States in particular is like super factioning into right and left, like conservative, like Republican, Democrats, but groups that like you identify more primarily with that than anything else. Like talked a lot about indicators, how like the person you voted for in the last election is an indicator that's stronger than any other indicator for things like where you would go to church, or what stores you would shop at, or what kind of food you would eat. Things along those lines that are like these, like, so sociologists are talking about these like super factions. And one of the things I found really intriguing that's like the other side of what you're talking about is that more people now identify as evangelical who actually never go to church. But when they're asked in like a survey, they say they're an evangelical. And it's because the bigger group they participate in is aligned with that, right? So it's that like, and that it's just really, so hearing your story and talking about that makes me think of that idea that like, yeah, I mean, I totally understand the fear of like, that's being described, you know what I mean? Like that is kind of the modern church in North America. And so your dad's probably the smartest one, going to church on the lake, you know, like honestly.
Yeah.
But did you like leave religion altogether, like spirituality altogether?
So for a while I did. I went through kind of a crisis of identity in college where I sort of dabbled conceptually, not really, but dabbled conceptually with a variety of things, and a lot of reading and whatnot, that sort of thing. And I don't want to name things because I have a feeling I'd accidentally be offensive in the way I talked about them because I don't know enough about them.
Oh, that's fair.
But anyway, I ultimately then spent some more years kind of as a, maybe I would have described myself as agnostic for a little while, and then ultimately came around to, no, I'm pretty confidently atheist, that sort of thing. And then more recently, several years ago, had more of a sort of like psychological trauma, if you will, where I was high anxiety and depression and all those sorts of things. And literally, I dragged my wife to a church, actually.
Really?
Maybe I need God, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And ran into my therapist there and ran back out of the church.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so, I took that as sort of a sign. Yeah, it was, and it was also like, looking back, I'm glad that it didn't work out, because it was absolutely a like an evangelical mega church that I don't want to like paint with broad brushes.
Yeah, sure.
But like, I have a feeling it wouldn't have been the crowd that I should have been around, that sort of thing. Anyway, and then eventually found through MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, first the mindfulness, right? And and then I was curious about the origins of that and started reading about, Buddhism a lot, and then started digging into actual, the actual texts of translated, Theravadan Buddhist scriptures. And I don't consider myself a Buddhist, but I do consider myself Buddhist inspired, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I think I called it earlier to you. I called it like Diet Buddhism or Buddhism Light or something like that. Mindfulness is probably the best way to describe it. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you are on a spiritual journey.
Yeah. I mean, I've gone through waves, and right now I'm kind of in one of these sort of trough things where I haven't been as obsessed with it, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
I was at its peak. There were days when I would meditate for 4 hours and things like that. Like, yeah, I took it pretty seriously, but it wasn't like I was just like a yellow robes kind of guy. It was just that I needed to, or I was feeling like I would fall apart if I didn't, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And now I'm in a stage where I have been for a while. I'm actually at the moment, I could probably use some more of that. But I've been for a while in a stage where I'm, better off. And
I was gonna say you're in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign now, so you probably do need to meditate a whole bunch. Exactly. You need some Zen to keep you sane, I would imagine. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, I bet actually, the waves thing you mentioned, that is just 1,000% a common experience among people on any kind of spiritual journey, for sure. Like, when I think about, and I say that as somebody that pastors people and is on his own spiritual journey. I mean, when I was in seminary, like you say, 4 hours of meditation. When I was in seminary, I remember being able to meditate for very long periods of time, or to have meditation sessions or whatever. And now I'm at a point in my life where I've been lucky if I can meditate for a minute. I'm lucky, and every month I use a really cool book. It's actually right here next to me, and I have never pitched this on the show, but I'll use this opportunity. You might be interested in this because it's not a Christian thing at all. It's called the Monk Manual. It's essentially a daily planner that's rooted in kind of meditative spirituality, kind of in a really loose way, a really but also in a deep way. For example, you do things on a daily basis, you set monthly habits and themes, but you build reflection into your day. You start your day by naming things you're grateful for, things you're looking forward to, and then you have a period at the end of the day for reflection. But my monthly habit this month was meditating again. And so I've been reflecting on okay, what are the things that are getting between me and meditating? If I really want to meditate, why am I finding it difficult? And really trying to get at where that's coming from in me. That at the start of this month, I used to meditate for a long time too. At the start of this month, I could put on a 5-minute YouTube meditation and not get through it. Mm-hmm. That's just where I was. Yeah. And I think I've maybe taken baby steps in 30 days. It's 29 days. It's the 29th. I've taken baby steps in the last 29 days, towards more than that. But also giving myself permission to, I've been doing morning prayer. What's really interesting is for a while, had gotten really bad at my habit of morning prayer. Mm-hmm. My meditation goal, though, made me start doing morning prayer in the morning, because it was I can't meditate right now, but I could do this. And now my morning prayer habits gotten stronger again. So I don't know. Yeah, I think it's a common thing for it to come in waves, and to kind of go to it when you need it. Maybe is that one? I don't know if that matches your experience or not.
Yeah, I think so. I also think that there's something about the media we consume and how what that directs your brain to. So for example, right now I'm very RPG obsessed. It's RPG's fault. That's why I'm not in a spiritual place right now.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Just like your church said as a child. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. It is the
satanic panic was right all along.
Yeah.
Someone should clip that.
I've been listening. Yeah, exactly. I've been listening to a lot of RPG content, watching a lot of RPG content, reading about RPGs, reading RPGs, all of that.
Yeah.
And so that has eaten up some of the time that I used to spend listening to mindfulness podcasts and those sorts of things. I also reflect on the same thing with my wife. We're having some parenting challenges right now, and there was a time when we were reading a lot of parenting books and podcasts, and my wife pointed out recently, she's saying, if we would read these things more again, we'd probably be like in the right mindset more often to be good parents, that sort of thing. I think there's a lot to be said about how much media you consume and what media you choose to consume, about what mind space it puts you in.
Yeah, I think that's really deep, and I think you're right about that. There is a book about this is so funny because I'm like, there's a book I bought a number of years ago about that. Started to read, never finished. I should probably go back to it. But it is basically about that. It is about it from a family and parenting sort of perspective. And I kind of wish I had digested it better when I bought it than I did, because I think there's a lot of truth to what you just said. And I'm like, my kids are getting to an age now where I'm like, oh, I am not prepared for this. I should have, because my kids are like becoming like, my oldest is 11, and my other two are just turning 11 and 6, and I'm kind of scared of the media that they might start consuming and that they have started to consume, and I feel unprepared kind of for, like, I haven't just taken any steps to like really prepare myself for the ages that they're entering into. And I think that what you said is so true, that like I really need to be attentive to like how media affects them and puts them in certain mindsets in certain spaces.
Yeah. And I think it's not even just like you learn something and move on, right? It's like finding a way to be steeped in it long term, right? Is what makes the difference.
Yeah.
So bringing this around to like a Buddhist concept, like karma is a popular word where, the Western conception of karma is like there's some cosmic judge or something that's going to, whatever. And then, I have my own, the actual word means action, I believe, so there's not necessarily any direct correspondence to, like, oh, if you do something, it's going to come back around to you, that sort of thing.
Right.
I take it to mean, my own sort of mantra, if you will, is karma is practice. And it's this idea that what you practice, you get good at. Right. And so, there's a quote, I can't remember who said it. It's like, what people do to you is their karma. How you react is your karma. But anyway, bringing it back to this. So like if you spend time being happy, right, then you're practicing being happy. Right? If you spend time being angry, then you're practicing being angry.
Yeah.
If you spend time realizing that you're angry and choosing to move to a more wholesome mental state, which is right effort, right, then you're practicing recognizing anger and moving to more wholesome states, right? And so as it relates to media, if you listen to media that's about how to put yourself in better mind states, or media that's about how to better handle challenging conflicts with your children, or whatever it is, you're much more likely to be in the right mind state to do that when it comes up.
It's going to sound crazy, but I started watching, so because I was doing the crowdfunding campaign for my game Broken, I wanted to consume the opposite of, like, Although it really backfired. But I wanted to consume the opposite of tragic romance. I wanted to consume like positive romance stories and kind of trashy ones. I was like, and I wanted to like so I was watching some reality television around romance.
Oh man.
Yeah. And so I kind of started going down some rabbit holes I had never gone down for that. But actually, I started like getting way too into Married at First Sight. Do you happen to know that show?
I do.
Yeah.
I actually have a ex-colleague who was on one of the shows. I won't say which one.
Okay. Okay. All right. So what I didn't expect, and I started watching it from the very beginning of the show, which was like 12 years ago or something. And what I didn't really expect was actually to find that the foundation for that show is like actually trying to how do marriages actually work. Mm-hmm. And even though it's a reality show where there's a lot of fighting and there's like reality TV show nonsense to it, and also a lot of other kind of baggage to that show that I won't even bother getting into now, but it is a very heteronormative sort of thing. You know, it is what it is.
Right.
But like it did put me into mind spaces to really think about conflict, marital conflicts, like partner conflict, spousal conflict, and like the way we choose to. It's interesting because I think like one of the things I've learned from that show, or that I knew but it really re-emphasized for me, was like choosing to commit to things in people, choosing to that like things like love and marriage are like really a choice of commitment, like more than anything else. Yeah. So it's been interesting how like consuming that media, it like is not what I expected. Like it like did something else in me than I was kind of expecting, and like in kind of a good way, even though it's reality television, which I definitely was not expecting. But yeah, I don't know. I think you're 100% right that I love the idea of practice. Like, that's what that is kind of the foundational concept of the monk manual I was talking about, is like the things we practice every day are the things that we become and are. And I think that's just beautiful. This conversation has been very encouraging for me personally, so I appreciate being able to talk about some of this like mystical and sort of meditative stuff.
Cool.
I did not know it was going to be such a spiritual conversation when we went into it.
I've been enjoying it. Yeah, I've been enjoying it.
So can you please like give people updates on like where's the Kickstarter now? Give us some sales pitchy type stuff. Yeah. I would ask you. So one of my questions I usually ask people at the end of the show is like, what are you working on next? But I feel like this is also your answer to that, because it seems like you've got a lot of work ahead of you.
It is. Yeah, I've got other ideas in mind, but for now, my focus is going to be on this. And actually, I there's somebody that I'm very excited to hopefully bring on to help me complete some of these games. I don't want to name drop yet because it might not work out.
Sure.
But I think, you know, you can read into that what you will.
Okay.
Anyway, One Night Worlds, Zero Prep GM List, one-page TTRPGs on Kickstarter right now until September 6th, I think it is. I should probably know the date when it's going to end.
I believe
September
it's 10 days,
9th.
isn't it? September 9th, okay.
Yeah, September 9th. Is that right? Yeah, that's it. So, you know, back it before then. You can back it for just $1. And really you're going to get a lot for just that $1. So my big surprise is that a lot of people have been choosing to back it at the $10 level, which adds the what I call the campaign edition, which adds playbooks and settling elements and things that are inspired from BOB design systems, and brings it into the push system. Right now we're at, we just crossed $5,500, which means that we have smashed through somewhere around 13 or 14 stretch goals.
Wow, that's a lot of stretch goals.
Yeah. So the thing there is, Tony from Plus One XP.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce that? Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what the right way is. I know how I always say it, but I always just say EXP, but I don't know if that's correct. It could be XP. I'm not sure.
Yeah, he was kind enough to look at the preview page and give me some feedback, and really helped me simplify my message. And so kudos to Tony.
Friend of the show, Tony Vicinda. He's awesome. We love Tony here.
Yeah, and a great content creator too. So check out Plus One XP. Anyway, one of the things that he didn't directly tell me to do, but like his feedback sort of inspired me to do, was to really widen out what the stretch goals that I had intended were, and then from there I was like, but I actually want more stretch goals so that I have reasons to be updating people, right? I don't want to have to invent reasons. I want to have real reasons to update people, and so I ended up cutting them into smaller bits, and it's been cool for me too, because it means that there's something to be excited about all the time. I found that watching the number tick up is cool and all, but having a specific next milestone to see it go over is a big difference and really exciting. Anyway, I went off the sales pitch.
Yeah, no,
Let me get back on the sales
pitch. You're good.
So One Night Worlds, it's a collection of 5 games now. And with the campaign edition, you get a world guide and character playbooks and setting elements, and a solo toolkit now for several of the games if you prefer solo play, and some optional advanced rules if you want a little bit more mechanical heft with the games. Some of the games it's more mechanical heft. Other games it's deeper thematic stuff. Yeah, and all of that for just $10 if you want, the whole kit and caboodle, so to speak. You can find that just by searching One Night Worlds on Kickstarter, or searching my name, Brian Hazzard, on Kickstarter.
Absolutely.
And if you want to follow the progress of it, if you want to follow the progress of it, you can also check me out on Twitter at Instadeath Pod.
Awesome. Yeah, I also linked the campaign in the chat right now on Twitch as we're live, and it'll be in the show notes on people right now. So if you're watching this after the fact, just go down to the show notes for YouTube or Twitch, and you will see the link for Kickstarter there also. And I'll put the Instadeath Twitter and all that stuff in the show notes also. So cool. Well, thank you very much, Brian, for taking the time to come on the show during your campaign. I know campaigns are very busy times, so I appreciate you, taking time out of your campaign to come and talk to us about both the games and spirituality and stuff like that. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate your time as well, Ben. Thank you for having me on.
Sure. And I will just say last personal note about it. I am really excited to eventually get Holding Darkness Within and bringing that horror setting to my game club, because we love horror.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to ask Brian to hang out here in our digital back room, and I'm going to go back to just me here so we can wrap the show up. Thanks again to everybody for watching. Huge thanks again to Brian for coming on the show. It just was a really lovely chat, and I deeply appreciate Brian taking the time to come on. I hope you all will go back. I mean, I don't know what you're possibly waiting for. It's $1 to back One Night Worlds, and I don't know if I've ever seen a Kickstarter where you get so much for $1. So seriously, it's kind of a no-brainer, and you can consider that $10 level if you want to. Please don't forget to hit the follow button if you are watching this on Twitch, or consider subscribing to the channel on Twitch, which I deeply appreciate. It helps sustain these things that we do. If you only caught part of tonight's show, you'll be able to watch it on demand for a brief time here on Twitch, but you'll be able to find Holy Happy Hour Batman on YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And hey, maybe you're watching it there right now. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit the little bell so you get notified when we're going live or when there's another episode that's about to drop. Huge thanks to Joshua Wise for the artwork on the stream that you see, and thanks to Doctor Octoroc for the use of his music on the show also. I just remembered I promised you all last week that I'd come back this week with more information on Doctor Octoroc's next Kickstarter campaign. He's doing a Kickstarter campaign to do a chiptune cover album for the Beck album, and it just went right out of my head. So I failed my promise. I did not prepare to talk about it a whole bunch more. There's Mousberg's making jokes about syrup in the chat, and I'm missing it. I feel like I'm missing out on the humor here. What, poor Demerara, that they got turned into syrup, more like poor I think I missed the joke, so just gonna keep on going. Yeah, what was I saying? All right, well, I will try to remember. We won't have an episode next week. We're actually on hiatus for Labor Day next week. I hope you find some time to enjoy a nice holiday weekend for yourself if you're able to, for those who are able. I'm not always making you drink, people, Mossberg. That's not true. And my wife is not on to also join in the jokes. But the week after that, we are going to have a couple of Drakes on the show, who is a really fun game design team who does really awesome work. So you're not going to want to miss that episode. That's in 2 weeks from tonight, September 12th. We'll be back with another great episode, same bat time, same bat channel here with a couple of Drakes coming on to talk about their work, like Court of Blades and other games like that. So you are not going to want to miss that. So, all right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Have the holiest and happiest of hours, my friends, and we look forward to seeing you all here in 2 weeks. Have a very good night.
Calling all citizens of Halcyon City. The newest generation of heroes are now painting the pages of Delinquent Comics, a Masks new generation actual play podcast. Complete back issues are available now on allportsopen.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are found. You can help join the fight and hear the newest releases early by becoming a supporter on Patreon at patreon.com/allportsopen. New bi-weekly episodes become available to all citizens on May 24th, featuring the newest arc, the Sunset Island Saga.